Hello and welcome, everyone. Once again, I'm very much happy to see both the guests and the speakers. Let me apologize for my hoarse voice. I've got a cold, so my main tool of work is functioning. Not 100%, but the rest is wonderful, so mustn't complain. So the topic of our today's discussion is Ukraine and its place in international business environment. Today, we will be speaking about Ukrainian business worldwide and international business of Ukraine, wartime chronicles and post-war forecasts, whether Ukraine, post-war and even during war, can become an attractive place for doing business and become a fine partner for international companies, and what Ukraine should do in addition to the victory to guarantee that. That's all we will be talking about today, both with Ukrainians. This is Igor Liski, Oleksandr Kosovan, hello. As well as that, online with us, could you kindly bring them on the screen, our distinguished speakers from the United States, Sandra Volpe. I cannot see her now yet. Good morning, Sandra. And from Singapore, Gregory Lee. Good evening, Gregory. Let me say a few words about each of our speakers. Let me start with Oleksandr Kosovan. He is a Ukrainian IT CEO, MacPaw owner, and a founder of SRMK Fund, which invests heavily into Ukrainian startups. So he began his business in 2008. When he was just 28, he wrote his first code for Clean MacPaw. And this is what started MacPaw company, which as of now has already released more than 10 software programs used by more than 30 million users worldwide in more than 180 countries. Another impressive figure to give you, every fifth Mac computer uses MacPaw software. This is highly impressive. Thank you for your accolades. Igor Liski, the founder and the chief of the Supervisory Board of Effective Investments Fund. So your main idea is to implement large-scale investment projects in Ukraine. Igor founded his company in 2007, and in 2014 he lost more than 80% of his assets due to Russian aggression, because unfortunately his assets predominantly were in the Lugansk and Donetsk regions of Ukraine. But as of now, he has already launched 6 green and brownfield projects, and he doesn't stop investing in Ukraine. I have known Igor and Oleksandr for a long time, and I definitely know that they are more than proactive. They're true visionaries and patriots of Ukraine. They believe in the future and invest in the economic development of our land. Sandra Volpe. Sandra is an independent director of a public company called Republic Service. Likewise, she is the head of the board of directors. She is the chairwoman of the American Heart Association and a member of the board of trustees at Kent State University. Before July 2017, she was the senior vice president on strategic matters in business development and communication developments at FedEx company. FedEx, as you know, is the world leader in express delivery, and it entered Ukraine more than 20 years ago. And Sandra can tell you if she thinks that global FedEx is a success in Ukraine. Gregory Lee, the founder of acquisition fund Wonder Life. At the same time, Gregory is a board member of a public energy Yangtze Group company and a strategic consultant for FoodZap technology. He knows Ukraine very well, thoroughly, due to his background as the president and CEO of Samsung. He has traveled for many years. He is very well aware of numerous markets from the standpoint of Samsung company, and he's shared with me that Ukraine has always been considered one of the most successful markets for Samsung, and he will share about why. And let me introduce myself. My name is Iryna Papusha. I'm a professional and an independent corporate director. So thank you all for being with us. and let us get our discussion underway. Today we get to hear a lot of admiration about the Ukrainian spirit, about our unbreakable spirit, resilience, steadfastness, something that both foreigners and our fellow citizens speak about. We didn't come to understand previously how strong-willed we are. And the treatment of Ukrainians has changed dramatically. And I would like to begin our discussion with a blitz poll, whether the treatment of Ukraine and Ukrainians as a business partner has changed, not just as a nation, but business-wise. And I would like to give the floor to Sandra first.
Ми не чуємо Сандру.
Sandra, we cannot hear you, sorry. No sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I think there's been a great deal of empathy across the world for what's happening in Ukraine. But it doesn't change effectively the business and the industry that it comes out of Ukraine and the partnership that we formed with Ukraine, correct? There's a lot of opportunity for greater partnership, and there's a lot of opportunity to continue investment in Ukraine with many things, the natural resources, the IT production that's offered, and some of the other business investment that we can make to further partner with Ukraine. So I think the war has maybe brought more of that to light, brought more visibility at the global stage for what Ukraine has to offer. There's really a wealth of resources in not just natural resources, but also in labor resources and people. And your resilience and your continued efforts really prove out what an opportunity it is to work with the people of Ukraine moving forward in business, in investment, and really in understanding the culture and how that culture supports that business environment.
Thank you, Sandra. Igor, якщо можна вашу думку.
Igor, if we can please hear your opinion. You are working with the whole world, so what's happening? Hello, everyone. First of all, I distinguish that into two things. First is the emotional perception. The first days of the war was the time when everybody felt sorry for us, everybody empathized with us, sympathized with us, and they would ask what support could be rendered, how they could help. This was a kind of emotional shock. Then after this sympathetic attitude, everybody went awe-inspired, like, why are they not surrendering? Come on, what's going on? They're repelling attacks, they're reclaiming territories, and now they're beginning to render their respect to us and understand fully who Ukrainians are, what they're fighting for and why. Definitely there's no such questions as where it is, what's the difference between Ukrainians and Russians. There's already understanding of what Ukraine is and what Ukrainians are. So this is all about esteem and respect. But business-wise, still, I do agree, the potential is rich. There's a great deal of interest and a lot of anticipations. And now it is our part to formulate not only what we need, and by the way, there are some issues to handle here, but we will. But the question is what we can contribute to the world, how we can contribute to the world economy and Europe as a member of the EU, as a business partner, what we can contribute to the whole world. So this is very much important, that this respect, high esteem of Ukraine and everything Ukrainian, made in Ukraine, has to be translated into a specific, tangible offer, cooperation, and interest. Tangible cooperation, where we can pragmatically, well, I don't like, say, make use of that, but anyway, utilize this opportunity. Oleksandr, please. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I would break this question into several ones. In the first place, we feel the sympathy from the people because the people feel for us, they're supporting us, they're ready to make use of Ukrainian products, and that's wonderful. But no less important is a business reputation, goodwill. So we as business partners, if we continue to deliver on our obligations to deliver goods and services, that's something that immediately evokes respect. As a warring country, we still continue to produce, manufacture, and deliver goods. So this causes awe and amazement with the rest of the world, and of course makes the world respect us. So the business in Ukraine has to clearly understand that covering themselves up with war and not delivering on your obligations can definitely impact very badly on the perception of Ukraine as a business partner. So it's vitally important to maintain a good face.
Your point of view.
Gregory, would you kindly share your personal viewpoint with us? Can you hear us?
I want to thank you for inviting me to the forum during such an important time for Ukraine. I have traveled to Ukraine many times as the business that Samsung operated was one of the most successful businesses in the world. I believe that a strong Ukraine makes America strong, makes everybody in Europe stronger, and positions itself well versus the kind of forces that Russia brings. So I believe that it's not sympathy alone that is important for Ukraine to be strong. Samsung has invested in Ukraine very early on, some 30 years ago, and stayed steady in investments. And even today, it has not pulled out. And the 500 engineers that are working in the R&D center are still working from their homes very actively. And so it's still, even during the war, I don't think the best companies in the world will pull out, because come back in later on will cost more and will be more difficult to be enforced in Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you. Я хочу ще додати.
Let me add, I think that Ukrainian business is pretty resourceful. Let me give you a small illustration. When yesterday, when they were just doing my manicure with a torch attached to the forehead, I realized that there's nothing that can stand in the way of Ukrainian business. So let me carry on with the following question. What's better for the Ukrainian business? Producing and manufacturing Ukraine and selling globally, or developing a Ukrainian brand and producing outside of Ukraine? Igor, one of your production facilities, Beehive, is ranks fourth in Ukraine in terms of honey production. But your production created a brand, and you started exporting not just the raw material, and now you're selling to about 26 countries in the world. Your Feed Nova manufacturing facility can export to dozens of countries. Your Zhytomyr cardboard producer has 35 different countries to export to. In spring, your production facility suffered from shelling, and I know that you have already invested 12 million in order to restore jobs. So you know accurately and from your own experience what losses you suffer. So did you have any ideas about relocating your premises abroad? Well, this is a question which means that businesses, as global international businesses, can exist without borders. It's not a burden, it's not a hurdle for business anymore, I mean, the borders. But there has to be something that drives you, and something that drives me, and something that I believe, and what I believe is the main potential for Ukraine. It's when the maximum added value is created in Ukraine. So what is this maximum added value about? First off, it's not about raw materials or exporting that. It's not about exported ready-made goods, but in the first place, it's about building a strong world brand that you will not be embarrassed about, that you will be proud of showing it to your international friends, just like I do it sometimes with my Oxfordian counterparts when I studied there, when I said to them, you have a dream to buy the best honey in the world. And it's a great pity that in London, unfortunately, you cannot afford to do that. Why? Why not? Well, when you are a brand, this chain of added value begins to work in your favor. Another vivid example, once again, is to do with honey. Ukraine has always been one of the top honey producers and exporters in the world. There's not a single brand in the world. You will not see that in Germany, America, or any other countries in the world. They will not mention that Ukrainians are one of the top producers, or oil seed producers, or just vegetable oil. Yes, they never speak about us Ukrainians. All of our Ukrainians, brand until recently, were heavily undervalued. Everybody knows about Mriya, the aircraft that was crafted back in the Soviet days, but Ukrainian brands, known world over, are non-existent. So it's very pleasant for me that such pioneering companies as Beehive and Ajax, and I hope some other ones, numerous ones in fact, and end users will be proud of using them. So this is my vision that drives me to carry on my business operations. And in this respect, building a brand name, of course, is difficult. Your product has to be so cool and so competitive that any standards, any hurdles and impediments, let's be honest and face it, that any country tries to protect itself from any other good having an added value. But this ambitious goal needs to be there, set and fixed for any company and for the country as at large. Country has to take care of all of the conditions. We will be talking about that. And by the way, so countries have to cater to the needs of such companies that create such added value. When they need to make sure that these companies is as many as they possibly can be. Let me tell you one unpleasant thing. They have to focus not so much on the building and development of the infrastructure of roads, but on making sure that a greater number of employment jobs is guaranteed. We need to get the people back to Ukraine. And if there are countries, if there are companies with added value, of course, it will be much easier for us to rebuild our infrastructure.
There are more than 450 people working in MacPaw. Their office is in KIEF. Almost all of them are Ukrainian, and at the same time, 40% of the market where you sell your products is the US, Western Europe, 20% are the other countries, and so Ukraine constitutes a very small percentage of those other countries, but you're doing all these things here. I'm pretty sure a Silicon Valley or every other IT hub would welcome you with open arms, but you stay here. Why? Right, so our main market is in the West, of course, Western Europe and America, but I'm Ukrainian by origin, and I want our country to be successful. And so I'm building a Ukrainian company. But if we're talking about development and business development in particular, unfortunately, Ukraine has not created suitable conditions for the business to create added value here. Even being a Ukrainian company in essence, legally, we're not a Ukrainian company because, unfortunately, there are way too many obstacles for us to be able to be efficient here from Ukraine. This is something that has to change because otherwise it will be very difficult to rebuild Ukraine after the war, to engage investments, to involve foreign companies will be almost impossible if we do not change that. Thank you. I studied with Sandra and Gregory in Harvard Business School. They represent international business, and those businesses are represented in Ukraine. I met Sandra for the very first time when we were competitors. I was the head of the console at the Nova Poshta, and Sandra worked for FedEx. I don't really have to tell you what Nova Poshta is, what is the quality, what is the efficiency of the company. The company occupies more than 70% of the market. FedEx is a global leader of the same market. But in Ukraine, FedEx is not as successful. Sandra, why did that happen? What are the reasons for FedEx not being able to develop as rapidly in Ukraine? What went wrong and what should have changed?
I think that part of the reason that you see FedEx in Ukraine not being as successful is similar to what they've seen across Europe. It's very difficult to come into a market and understand not just the culture, the people, the local customs, the geopolitical, but really understanding where you stand in that country specifically. And in Ukraine, I think part of the challenge that FedEx had was that they were the underdog coming in to a nation that really didn't understand all of what FedEx brought to the table. And as you said, the company that you represent certainly had the market share, had the cultural perspective, had the local perspective as well. And I think that coming in, what happens with many international companies when they come into, particularly from the United States, coming into Europe or Asia or wherever we're going, it's really understanding the balance between that headquarter mentality, I don't know how you want to represent it, and the cultural mentality of that nation specifically, and Ukraine specifically, because Ukraine's government is really very investment friendly and really a great country to partner with. But when you come into any country, it's really understanding what is not just the geopolitical environment, but what is the culture? What are the local norms? What are the working systems? And sometimes it's difficult to come into a country with the headquarter mentality because the majority of FedEx's business is in the United States and not appreciate the local customs and the local work ethics around that. So I think part of the challenge has been really trying to understand what does Ukraine and the Ukrainian people prioritize versus what FedEx prioritizes in business and in service, the service that we provide. I think there have been many challenges along the way, and I think one of the ways that we could have maybe been more successful is better understanding the Ukrainian culture and employing Ukrainian people, that labor pool, to really pull in and become part of that country and how we were going to perform in that country. Having said that, I think it's been many decades now that FedEx has been in Ukraine, and I think we continue to improve and make that market even stronger. Clearly, FedEx has still maintained their services as we go through this war, but they certainly have tried to embrace what is a local culture in Ukraine, which I think is important for any international company that enters any country. And that's where I think the line of success and failure truly comes to bear.
Thank you. Thank you for your opinion. And Gregory, please tell us about your different story, let's say success story, because Samson is a real leader in Ukraine.
Yes, Iryna, I also want to address your question specifically because I think it's an important question. To produce in Ukraine and sell worldwide or develop Ukrainian brands and produce them to worldwide. I can tell you that although Samsung has generated $1 billion in revenue annually and profited heavily, the number of wars and the political turmoil that Ukraine has gone through, unfortunately, Ukraine hasn't been as successful as Samsung has been inside of Ukraine. And that is because that in order to, I mean, Ukraine has 40 million population, much larger than some of the smaller, countries that Ukraine is surrounded by. So in order for a country of that, population of 40 million to be successful, that you have to have a diversity of sectors that are growing and to employ people. And as such, when Samsung tries to build a manufacturing plant versus having a high-end R&D center, which would employ more people and bring more sort of GDP growth to Ukraine, it doesn't have the kind of ecosystem for supply chain and the variety of different kinds of skilled labor. I do want to tell a balanced story, which is the Ukrainian people have shown the employees, at least Samsung has employed, have been very, very productive. Their labor costs have been competitive with Poland and produced, R&D talent much better so, with less international competition and so on. So as you said, Iryna, Samsung has been very successful, and it has gone through Crimean War and so on. So I think that there's much progress that can be made as you go forward in order for Ukraine to become a producer for the world, and that could be after the war to stabilize the country and to avoid wars going forward, build a safer and a more stable political system, more robust, and continue to invest in education, and to diversify the industries and to create higher value industries, even in the agricultural sector, even in the mineral culture sector, and even in the tech sector, where Ukraine is outstanding. But the tech sector competition, it grows constantly. So there are many challenges ahead that Ukraine as a country and government and team has to continue to make progress.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, I will show you presentation because Gregory made a couple of nice slides. Okay. Є такий вислів.
There is an expression of wise men that the most correct decisions are made when we directly face grave danger. Ukrainians are optimists by nature. We're insanely optimistic. But a lot of foreigners always ask us, do we take into consideration the worst case scenarios? And they ask us because they want to know whether we will lose or use our chance right now, whether we will be able to develop a program of our future to restore Ukraine, to make Ukraine prosperous in the future. And so my next question is, what exactly does business have to do? And what does the state have to do in order for us to not lose this chance? I wanted to start with Ukrainian speakers, but I can see that the presentation is right here on the screen. So Gregory, let me give the floor back to you. So please tell us what you think about it.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that everybody in the panel feels the same way. As I started to study this deeper, and when I interviewed all the management team of Samsung and the employees of Samsung, I just come to realize that this is such an important moment for the country. And it's rare that such a crisis can be also an opportunity, because when you look at this chart, that in 1990 and 1991, all these countries exited together out of the USSR Soviet bloc. Ukraine exited 1 year later, but for 30 years, Ukraine hasn't quite changed as much as these other countries. Ukraine joined WTO late. Ukraine just applied for the EU. And all of those registrations and applications mean that the government and the policies of Ukraine has to reform. Not in the Soviet way, but in a more contemporary, open economy with less corruption, and where all the dollars go to the oligarchs in the country. I feel that I have to speak honestly for the benefit of this economic forum, that you can see from this chart that 30 years later, Ukraine is at the bottom. And the people of Ukraine 30 years later are not as well off as Czechoslovakia, Poland, and even Russia or Bulgaria. I believe that this is the kind of crisis that will change the destiny of Ukraine going forward. So if you don't mind saying something about this chart, if you look at the ease of doing business or rank for corruption, which are all ranked by World Bank, you could see almost all the neighbors of Ukraine are higher, maybe with the exception of just one or two countries. I live in Singapore. I live in Singapore because it's such a safe place to do business. It's either number one or number two every year on ease of doing business. But despite that, you can see that in this chart, the ease of doing business ranking by World Bank, that even Russia is higher than Ukraine. And I think I just want to highlight that everybody knows that there's so much, it doesn't mean that Ukraine had the freedom to have the politics that are completely from Russia. But coming out of this war, Ukraine will have that opportunity to be a country where doing business is easier. Despite this, as I said, Samsung has been very successful. Yeah. So I just look for a quote that is a little bit different, but there are many quotes in this kind of crisis. This is coming out of the war. This will be an opportunity for all of us that support Ukraine to plant trees in Ukraine, because it'll benefit the future generations.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oleksandr, ви вже починали говорити, що має.
Oleksandr, you started saying what the state has to do in order to have the businesses not only based in KIEF, but also registered in KIEF, developing in KIEF in many aspects. Could you please build on what you had said? What does the state have to do, but also what does the business have to do in order to not lose this moment, this opportunity window? If we're talking about business, there are a couple of niches, like IT, that are quite successful. Like the Samsung Grandi Center, which is a great example of that. And they're very successful because the intervention of the state was a lot smaller. And so the businesses that are working in real economy, they're having a much harder time. We're lacking investments, we're lacking development, we're lacking growth. There's a lot of room for improvement. So looking at the situation from this point of view, one of the simple methods to improve business practices, to ease business conditions, is to decrease regulation, of course, to reinforce the taxation system, to make sure that business is not always on the losing side within the taxation principles, and also to make the economy more liberal. Those things are very simple, those solutions are very simple, but I think they will end up being critical for us to move on to restoration and rebuilding after the end of the war. Of course, success is not guaranteed, because beside that there will also be a lot of important elements such as human capital and returning human capital back to Ukraine. But those are the baseline requirements that we cannot build successful state without. Our Prime Minister promised liberalization of economy this morning, so this is something we'll hope for. And what does business have to do? I really hope that promises will finally be implemented, but it's much better to look at somebody's deeds than in somebody's words. We have a great example. There are many volunteer organizations who, since the beginning of the war, has done a tremendous amount to assist their victory. And when the state came in asking, how can I help? Those volunteer organizations explained the difficulties in terms of accounting, etc. And the state came in adding additional accounting requirements as a way to help, which didn't help at all. And this is a mentality that has to shift. The mentality of the governors, the mentality of the authorities, they should not create problems. Their intervention should be significantly less. Regarding business, what does business have to do? It's a very complicated question, because business adapts to conditions that it exists in. If the conditions are not favorable, business will find ways to evade those conditions, to find other jurisdictions, to work in other locations. That's a very simple formula. Money is flowing through the passage of last resistance. So the main question we have to address, not to the business, but to the state.
There is this national Ukrainian characteristic, resourcefulness, that you have already alluded to. But on the other hand, people sometimes help you for free, and then you go to them and you say, report in paper about this, please. And this goes already berserk. So provide your comments on that. Oh, well, on the one hand, I do agree fully with what has just been said. Concerning this forum, this is an economic forum. Is there anyone in this room, a representative of the government, maybe an MP? Oh, I can see your raised hand. What are you responsible for? We cannot hear the answer. The National Security and Defense Council. It's pretty weird, but anyway, thank you for being here. I think our country will begin to change when it's not us businessmen who listen to our governmental top officials at the beginning of such events, but when half of the audiences will be members of the committees, commissions, representatives of different economic line offices and ministries, and taking records of what we businesses have to say. Because the key driver of economy, added value, payroll, GDP, the development overall is business and entrepreneurs and the people who create this added value. And we Ukrainians are exceptionally lucky that we are so many. And more often than not, they work and develop not because the state helps them and because there is a certain program to support, but quite often against the odds. That's why I very much want, first and foremost, for our business people to believe in themselves and get rid of this mediocrity perception of themselves. They have to start believing in themselves that they're truly cool. That businessmen have to believe in themselves that we are cool, we're awesome, and we can compete at the world level and come up with state-of-the-art technology and products. That's the first point. And second thing, if in former times it was enough not to impede such people as us, now it requires coming to us and asking, what do we have to do in order to help you compete in the world in a better way? So what can be done in order for Kosovan's company to be more competitive in the world and for his company to be registered here in Ukraine? That Oleksandr Liski comes to Ukraine and builds another production facility here in Ukraine, but not in Italy. What can be done so that Ajax grows? Oleksandr, come on, what do you need for you to become so cool in this world that you become brand number one and can acquire companies globally? I wonder if anyone has ever approached you with that question. We couldn't hear it from the audience. The main idea is that I have my own business, and I'm happy about that. So we always develop not due to something, but against something. And this is how we are making our ends meet. So this short list, if I bring it to a close, the country knows that, the government knows that. So the government mustn't grow, but it must diminish. But we have the contrary processes. Everything is being nationalized. Everything ends up in the national banks. Private banks are decreasing in number. Everything is being nationalized, as I said. But we need a reverse process. The government has to be less. So non-effective state-owned assets have to be sold. That's the first thing. Secondly, we as a country have to think about how our producers will be competing worldwide. We are much dreaming about becoming a member of the EU, but unless now we start thinking about how our Ukrainian producers will be competing in the EU, what conditions have to be created for them, what mechanisms of lending have to be offered to them, what kind of interest rates have to be provided to them for them to compete once again, what credit lines and credit agencies have to be established in Europe to support Ukrainian businesses, let alone the taxation system in Ukraine, because quite often taxes are rebated, tax rebates are returned, not returned, something ends beyond brackets. So it requires changing the mindset of our governmental officials that the people that create this land makes this land, and it all begins with manufacturers, those people who bear the brunt, those that assume responsibility for their people who become their labor force. So once we change this mindset, I'm sure that our entrepreneurs will not fail you. They will come up with some fantastic products. They will capture this world, just like they're captivated by the armed forces of Ukraine right now. I'm sure they will be just as captivated of our brands and companies.
For special agency, Sandra, I know you have a very similar idea about agency, how to promote Ukraine in worldwide. So please share with us.
Thank you. I'm probably going to repeat a lot of what has been said in some form or fashion. So the purpose of business is make a profit, get a return. At the end of the day, that's why businesses would invest. There's a market to invest in, and they know they can make money in that market. I think for foreign investors to actually invest in Ukraine, ease of business obviously is number one from a perspective of what challenges am I going to face in order to get a return on that investment. But I think more importantly, what Ukraine can do, and from a government, from a state agency, from any type of agency, is what is the roadmap for success in Ukraine? If you give foreign investors a roadmap for success, and that means, okay, how do I recruit the right talent? And Ukraine is incredible in talent. They have so many IT specialists and engineers in the country. It really does support leveraging that type of talent in a foreign investment. So how do I recruit? What's the culture here that I need to adapt to? How do I become successful? Can I purchase land in the country? How do I get electricity? All of those basic ideas when investors come into a country, particularly if they're in there in a manufacturing environment or a services environment, how do I become successful in Ukraine? And that's something that can only be provided as a roadmap to an investor. So it's not just ease of business, it's about helping foreign investors understand what it means to be successful in Ukraine. So I think that's probably, in my mind, something that helps and something that agencies can do to support foreign investment and growth. Because if you have foreign investment, then you're going to have growth in your country, and you have to step away from a more nationalistic stance and welcome that foreign investment and that type of an environment. So, to me, from a foreign investment standpoint, those are really critical about guidance, tips, service, manufacturing, production. What do I have to do as a foreign investor, and who can I partner with to be successful in Ukraine? when you think about Ukraine business internationally, you know, it's that balance, right? If you welcome foreign investment, then in some ways that's reciprocated, because if you can produce, and Ukraine can produce products and services and do different types of service offerings where they can export what they have to offer to other foreign countries. And again, that reciprocity exists because there is an ease of business between countries and between investors and between foreign agencies. So from my perspective, there's a lot that can happen, but the government, the states, the agencies have to be willing to welcome those individuals and those businesses and give them a roadmap for success, because that's how they're going to feel comfortable taking a risk to invest in Ukraine, particularly during this current geopolitical environment.
Thank you. So, насправді чудова ідея.
In fact, this is a brilliant idea to invite investors with an open heart and embrace, and say that for you to be successful and work with us, this is the way that we have to work. We are client-oriented, we are speedy, we are hardworking, and so on and so forth. And every industry, of course, has its own specificity. But this idea of creating a roadmap of success for foreign investors and partners is really a brilliant one, where we can demonstrate how and where they can draw and tap into the pool where Ukraine is very rich in. Let me continue our discussion concerning investments, because you are both investors and our foreign friends also have numerous ideas. So clearly we have to invest in the recovery and reconstruction of everything ruined. Along with that, which industries are truly appealing, attractive investment-wise? Where do you try to invest? I know that Oleksandr has his focus on IT startups. In addition to that, I know you have already invested, even during the war, into renovations of one of the manufacturing facilities in Ukraine, and have already created more than 3,000 jobs. So you invest in order to support Ukrainian nation. But if we carry on along these lines, concerning the areas and trends of investment, where else do we need to invest? Yes, thank you. Speaking about Prilad, that facility that we have invested, this is a heavy investment in human capital. It's not for making a revenue. It's a project that generates the necessary due conditions where people, without having to leave the country, can come up with the necessary partners and be in due conditions in order to cooperate. So this is what this project, Prilad, is all about. And I think that such projects are vitally important, both in the time of war and post-war. Because after the war is over, sooner or later, we will be confronted with the problems when many people will be reluctant to come back to Ukraine, because they will have settled, they will have found themselves good employment, and it'll be a huge problem to get them back to Ukraine. On the other hand, talking about investments now in Ukraine as a really peculiar situation, because the market has changed very much from the standpoint of the employer. Previously, finding a talent was always expensive and competitive. Now the tables have turned. And now the situation for young startups and small companies is a very fine trend that can be utilized. So as for me, it is time to invest in such companies which, even during the war, keep thinking about the future and keep coming up with some cool and awesome products. So invest in them. Of course, investments themselves, unfortunately, in Ukraine is a huge problem, because external investors are willing to come. However, they're still waiting and trying to see how it's going to end. There's a lot of uncertainty. However, they believe in Ukraine. Those investors that are still in Ukraine, they continue investing. We, as a foundation, have already made two huge investments during the time war, and we are already negotiating deals with some other companies. So we keep investing in Ukraine, and we see a very good potential in that. All right, let us take it on further on this line. IT, Gregory, the question goes to you. the look of the outsider on the IT sector. So could we have the last slide, please?
Yeah, Iryna, thank you very much. I just want to share, I think this is information that many people do know. You can see from this chart that Ukraine has very good science university, and Ukraine is ranked #1 among emerging markets for software developers. And you can also see in the areas of different domains, let's say math, security, distributed system. We have even CEOs on this panel who are, running some of these companies. In security software, Ukraine's #1. And Iryna, I sent you a few job descriptions to recruit Ukrainian engineers. But I also would like to highlight and agree with Oleksandr and Sandra that as Ukraine starts to make progress, it has to continue to steadily deliver on the promises, because foreign investments and foreign companies do not like disruptions, and money can always move somewhere else. I think that point has been made, and but it's worth iterating that companies want to see progress and seek stable and capable environments. And I do believe that, because I'm in IT and I would love to build an R&D center for my company or the companies that I'm acquiring into Ukraine. But I also know that I can hire in Vietnam. I can still hire in India or even Sri Lanka and countries nearby, Romania, Poland, etc. So it's a very competitive place. But I do believe, and I'm confident, that Ukraine can compete and do very well, as long as we work hard together to bring stability and recovery and build a political system that really works for the future.
Great. Я дуже хотіла, щоб Григорій показав саме цей слайд, тому що
I wanted Gregory to demonstrate this slide because there Ukraine ranks top, somewhere first, somewhere third. And this is incredibly pleasant, satisfying. We know that we are cool, but when foreigners say that we are cool, that's something that you do want to share. So Igor, could you pick up on that? And could you tell us about your medical products? Medical Star is doing a lot of volunteering work. You keep investing in industries. So where do you see it now, in wartime and post-war time, that investments will not be just needed, but also profitable? I'm also a great, I respect heavily our IT producers very much. However, I'm not very much optimistic. And I don't see a great breakthrough in post-war time in Ukraine in IT area. Why not? In the first place, Ukraine requires maximum added value. And unfortunately, in our IT area, we have very few product companies that can offer this added value, because the slide that Gregory has just demonstrated and where we really look cool, this is our huge IT Ukrainian potential. In many ways, 90% of the time works for international companies, and all added value is generated there. And it's there that potential and the center of profit-making remains. What I believe in is industrialization of Ukraine. I truly believe, I'm a great proponent of product-making companies. We have to realize where this added value is created. If it's IT, these are product-making companies that sell end-user products. If we talk about processing foodstuffs, everybody speaks about Ukraine as a breadbasket of Ukraine or the world leader in many different positions. However, this potential may be tapped into by anyone except Ukraine, because unfortunately in Ukraine is not processing anything. 70% of grain or corn is not processed in Ukraine, not as starch, not as any products or as pasta products. It just gets exported out of Ukraine. So I would really like for investment projects to be here for us to create these end products. This may happen not within a year, but anyway, we have to move along these lines. Therefore, immediately after the victory is won, no, even better way, just now. I don't like it when people say, let's talk about it after victory is won. I do not allow such talks in my company. I want the development here and now. Someone who's not developing here and now, who's not growing, begins to die. So we cannot afford to wait for victory, because it's already part of victory when you keep developing and creating the future for your own companies. I do believe that our huge potential means becoming an industrial playground. When Ukrainian companies platform, when Ukrainian companies will become a fool for creating engineering products, but something that has to stay in Ukraine and produced here in Ukraine, and having this potential, recognition worldwide, and desire to help. So that the first place we have to think about not just the renovation of schools, hospitals, or administrative and public buildings, which is important, but first and foremost, our focus has to be
on employment opportunities, on innovation companies, and engaging investors. I want for us to become a platform like South Korea did or China did. I want for us to become an industrial platform for Europe. I want to have innovational companies move here. I want to have normal life here, and I want to make sure that we involve Ukrainians who left back, and that we find other sources for human capital, because even without this war, if we were solely relying on agriculture or IT, there would be only 3 to 5 million people left in Ukraine. 1 million people is enough for us to work our land, and IT potential can only employ 500,000 people. What jobs do other people find? What other 30 million do? So the only signal we're sending them is go work abroad, find employment in Germany, in Great Britain, and Israel. Economies are fighting for people who are willing to work, for people who are smart, for people who are ambitious. This is a critical point. We have to think about it right now. We have to create employment opportunities, projects right now to bring people back. I completely agree with you. We have to actually move on from the raw materials economy, and in IT sector as well.
Investments?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Sandra, do you have anything to add about investments?
In Ukraine?
No, I think the majority of it has been said. And my comments, actually, the last comments were very relevant, because when I think about where the opportunities lie, I think about the IT sector, and I think about things like the semiconductor sector, right? And how you can utilize that. And maybe that's not the best opportunity for Ukraine, because it is services, and they are services that are provided offshore more than they're provided inside Ukraine, right? So I think IT was something like 4% of your GDP before the war, and that's a big sector, and it employs people. But you're right, there's no production of anything there that can continue to employ the population of Ukraine. So it's a great discussion, and I really feel like, to me, when I think about it, the natural resources are something that you really have a very good position on, and IT. But you're right, if you can't produce products from that, if you can't do something with building materials or with semiconductors where you can get that foreign investment to grow businesses onshore, it does create a little more difficulty to continue to see the economy flourish. So it's a really good discussion. I think that it's something that needs to be explored further, for sure.
Great, thank you. So, можемо
So we can just draw a really brief conclusion, even now, not waiting for a victory. We have to liberate the economy and focus on services and goods with added value, not on raw material economy. We have to also retain human potential. We have to create new job opportunities for the people who have left and are willing to come back. And towards the end of our discussion, I would like for all of us to pass on some regards to Ukrainian businessmen for the future and for today. Who would like to start? Sandra, Gregory, do you have something to say to Ukrainian businessmen? Oh, okay. They're not here. So, gentlemen, right. I believe that Ukrainian businessmen are heroes who are fighting for our country today, who are defending our country, but they're defending our rear. Economy has to work. And under these conditions, it is extremely difficult, it is extremely stressful, and they also need support. So my wish to all of you is stay strong, together for victory. To sum up, I also wanted to wish all of you to not delay your development, to not delay new projects, to not delay new plans for the post-victory period. I want to wish all you to do it right now. And the second part is to believe in yourself. Remember that Ukrainians are a really cool nation, including businessmen. The people who are carrying large expenses on their shoulders by helping the armed forces, by helping the actual defending forces of Ukraine. I understand that we are really cool. And we have to create cool projects that we all will be proud of and our children will be proud of. I guess that's it. I would like to really thank you for this discussion. Thank all of you. For myself, I would like to wish all of us for our Ukrainian anger, for Ukrainian anguish to be limitless, but to be turned into a positive direction, for all of us to develop Ukraine, to bring back people who left, to be a prosperous nation in the future, to not see ourselves on the 65th place in a world rating, for us to be happy, for us to be cool, for us to be proud. Thank you.